For a decade, she thought she was feeding a monster. She was actually keeping a king alive. This is not a fairy tale. It's a psychological blueprint buried deep in our oldest stories, a hidden pact between a servant girl and a chained beast that would unravel an ancient curse and rewrite the history of a kingdom. Her name was Ilara, a scullery maid in the forgotten citadel of Viridian. Every night for 10 years, she descended into the blackness, drawn by a creature's mournful cries. She didn't know she was performing a sacred, secret ritual. She didn't know the scraps she carried were the only thing preventing a dark magic from consuming a royal soul completely. This is the story of how a simple act of compassion, repeated in shadow, became the only thread holding a kingdom together. And what happened the night that thread finally snapped? Ilara's life was defined by silence and shadow. Orphaned at 7 when a fever took her parents from their village hut, she was brought to the citadel not as a ward, but as a commodity, a piece of debt paid to the crown. Her world became stone floors, endless copper pots, and the distant, cold governance of Regent King Cashen. Cashen ruled Viridian with a paranoid grip. He had taken the throne a decade prior, after the sudden, mysterious disappearance of the true Alpha King, Kaelin, and his entire royal guard during a border skirmish. No bodies were ever found, only shattered armor and the lingering scent of dark magic. With the royal line presumed extinct, Cashen, a distant cousin, seized power. He immediately suspended the ancient moon councils, tripled the garrison, and imposed harsh tariffs that bled the villages dry. The kingdom didn't just stagnate, it began to rot from the inside out, and in the deepest dungeon, something began to howl. The first time Ilara heard it, she was 12. It was a sound that bypassed the ears and vibrated directly in the marrow of her bones, a deep, resonant agony that echoed up the service corridors from the old, sealed prison levels. The other servants crossed themselves and whispered of a demon Cashen had captured, a manifestation of the kingdom's decay. They warned her to never, ever go down there. But Ilara, who understood loneliness as a physical presence, felt a strange, painful kinship with that distant cry. It wasn't terror she felt, it was recognition. Her clandestine journey began with a stolen crust of bread. One night, driven by a compulsion she couldn't explain, she slipped past the drunken guards at the upper dungeon gate. She descended spiral staircases worn smooth by centuries into air that grew cold and thick with the smell of damp rock and something else, something wild and metallic. The torches gave out. She felt her way along the wall until her fingers found a heavy, rusted portcullis. Beyond it was only darkness and a breathing so slow and deep it seemed to sync with the heartbeat of the mountain itself. She pushed the bread through the bars, the breathing stopped. Then a low, cautious sniffing. A moment later, the scrap was gone. There was no attack, no roar, just a silence that felt attentive. The next night, she returned with a bit of cheese rind, then a bruised apple. It became her secret liturgy. After 10 hours of scrubbing, she would take her own meager supper, a bowl of thin broth, a heel of stale bread, and deliver half of it into the blackness. She began to talk. She told the darkness about her day, about the cruel head cook, about the glimpse of stars she caught from the kitchen vent. She spoke of missing her mother's voice. She received no words in return. But sometimes after she spoke, a warm puff of air would sigh through the bars like a quiet acknowledgement. She wasn't feeding a monster. She was keeping something company. But here, what Ilara didn't know, the creature in the dark wasn't just any prisoner. The dungeon she visited, known as the Vault of Echoes, was built for one purpose: to contain beings of immense magical power. Its stones were inscribed with silencing runes and strength-sapping wards. The chains that held the creature weren't iron, they were star-forged silver, etched with spells of binding so potent they required a living anchor, a continuous sacrifice of will to maintain. And the curse that twisted its form was not random. It was a specific, brutal piece of blood magic known as the Ashen Bond, designed to reduce a powerful ruler to a beast, erasing their mind and identity while keeping their body alive, a permanent, hidden trophy for their enemy. The food Ilara brought did more than stave off hunger. The consistent, mundane act of care, given freely without fear or demand, created a tiny, steady counter-rhythm to the curse's magic. It was a drop of clean water in a poisoned well. Unknowingly, with every scrap of bread, every shared silence, Ilara was not just sustaining a body, she was preserving a soul. Above ground, Regent Cashen's rule grew more brittle. Whispers of rebellion stirred in the eastern provinces. The Moonwell, the kingdom's source of magical alignment, had grown cloudy and weak since the true king's disappearance. Prophecies, long dismissed as folklore, began to resurface among the people. They spoke of a sleeping king, a beast in chains, who would return when the heart of the kingdom remembered its duty. Cashen dismissed this as peasant superstition. But he doubled the guard around the dungeon all the same. The turning point came on the eve of the decade anniversary of King Kaelin's disappearance. A rare celestial event was occurring, a lunar eclipse, what the old texts called a moon's tears. On such nights, the barrier between magic and material world was said to thin. In the dungeon, the creature was restless. Ilara, now 17, felt a strange pull stronger than ever. She took not just food, but a small woolen blanket she had secretly knit from scraps, something to ward off the deep chill. When she reached the portcullis, the air crackled with static. The usual deep breathing was a ragged, pained panting. She heard the heavy chains rattling violently, not in rage, but in what sounded like acute distress. "SHHH," she whispered, pushing the blanket through the bars. "It's all right, I'm here." For the first time, a sound that wasn't a growl or a breath came back. A low, broken rumble, almost like a word trying to be formed. A single, massive hand, covered in coarse grey fur and tipped with claws that could shred stone, slowly emerged from the gloom. It didn't swipe, it trembled, and with infinite care it closed around the blanket, pulling it gently back into the dark. In that moment, Ilara didn't see a beast. She saw a being in profound suffering. She reached her own small hand through the bars, not touching but offering. The creature went still. Then the broad, furred forehead leaned slowly forward and pressed with unimaginable gentleness against her open palm. A surge of warmth, of recognition, of a forgotten golden light flashed through her. It lasted only a second before the creature pulled back with a sharp snarl, as if burned. But the connection was made. The anchor of the curse had just found a new living tether. And high in his tower, Regent Cashen felt the ancient binding spells in the dungeon shiver. The very next day, Cashen issued a new decree. The old dungeons were to be permanently sealed. Mortar and magic would be used to brick up every passage, entombing whatever lay within. He claimed it was to protect the citadel from emanations of dark energy. But his eyes were frantic. He knew something had changed. The foreman gave the servants 1 week to clear any old storage from the upper levels. Ilara's secret was about to be walled up forever. That night she made her final descent, her heart a drum of despair. She had to say goodbye, but as she approached the familiar portcullis, she saw it. The rusted iron bars were bending outward, and from the perfect blackness within, 2 eyes glowed not with feral rage, but with a sharp, lucid, and terrifyingly intelligent amber light. The beast was awake, and it was staring right at her. Ilara did not run. In that amber gaze, she saw not the mindless fury of a beast, but a fractured, anguished intelligence. And in a voice that was less sound and more a vibration in the air, it spoke a single, clear word. Ilara, her name. The creature knew her name. The shock rooted her to the stone. How? The massive form in the shadows shifted, chains groaning in protest. The glowing eyes closed, as if the effort of that one word had cost it dearly. When they opened again, the amber light was dimmer, but the focus was absolute. A massive furred hand, the same one that had taken her blanket, reached slowly through the bent bars. This time it did not tremble. It turned palm up, revealing a deep, vicious scar across the center, a wound that had never fully healed, the flesh puckered and shiny even beneath the coarse hair. And then the hand began to change. The gray fur receded like mist under morning sun. The claws retracted. The powerful, bestial shape of the hand smoothed into the long, strong fingers of a man, though the scar remained, livid and white. The transformation stopped at the wrist, the rest of the arm still thick with beast fur, trapped by the pulsing silver manacle. The message was undeniable, and it shattered Ilara's world. This was no demon. This was a man imprisoned, tortured, and twisted by magic. And he had been aware, in some deep part of his mind, for every one of her 3,650 visits. The psychological impact of this realization cannot be overstated. For a decade, Ilara had operated on a foundation of simple, compassionate instinct. She had seen suffering and responded. Now that foundation was replaced by the staggering weight of conscious, witnessed gratitude. Every piece of bread, every spoken word, every moment of silent company had been received by a conscious mind fighting its own erasure. This transforms the narrative from a simple fairy tale into a profound case of trauma bonding and intermittent reinforcement, but in reverse. The beast was not the abuser, he was the victim, and Ilara, unknowingly, had been the sole source of positive reinforcement in a decade of torture. The bond they had formed wasn't magical. It was neurological, built on the bedrock of consistent kindness without expectation. And now, that bond was the only thing strong enough to counteract a decade of dark magic. The creature, the man, let his hand fall, the transformation reversing until it was once again a beast's paw. He let out a shuddering breath that fogged in the cold air. Then he did something that broke Ilara's heart. He pointed a single claw at her, then pointed down the corridor from which she came. He repeated the gesture, "Go, leave." His meaning was clear. The ceiling was imminent. He was telling her to save herself. But Ilara Sterling, the orphan who had survived by being invisible, found a steel in her spine she never knew she possessed. She looked at the bent bars, at the ancient rune-etched manacles, and then back into those knowing amber eyes. "No," she whispered, her voice firm in the echoing silence. "I'm getting you out." But how? The portcullis was locked by a mechanism 2 levels up, controlled by the guards. The manacles were star-forged silver, unbreakable by mortal means, and the curse itself was a living spell woven into the stones. Ilara had no weapons, no magic, no allies. All she had was 10 years of unnoticed movement through the Citadel's bowels and a mind sharpened by survival. She remembered the foreman's schedule. The masons with the ceiling mortar wouldn't arrive until first light. The regular dungeon guards, lazy and superstitious, made only one perfunctory sweep at midnight. She had until then, maybe 6 hours. She met the beast's gaze. "I need you to trust me, can you understand?" A slow, deliberate nod of that massive head. The intelligence was there, flickering like a candle in a storm, but it was there. "I'll be back before midnight, be ready." As she turned to leave, a low rumble stopped her. She looked back. The beast was pressing his forehead against the bars, his eyes pleading. He was fighting to hold onto that sliver of self, and he was asking her not to let him slip away. Ilara placed her hand against the cold iron opposite his brow. "I remember," she said, the promise settling in her bones. What followed was a masterclass in silent, desperate improvisation. Ilara didn't become a warrior. She used the only tools she had, her perfect knowledge of the servants' roots and the ingrained blindness of those in power. She went not to the armory, but to the laundry. She stole a set of guards' livery, not to wear, but to use as a diversion. She went to the blacksmith's abandoned annex, where broken tools were tossed, and found a pair of heavy, rusty bolt cutters, their jaws still strong. Her most critical stop was the Citadel's neglected library annex, a dusty room where old household ledgers were kept. Pushed to the back was a single shelf of books, salvaged from the old king's personal study before Cashen had it cleared. Among mildewed volumes on agriculture and treaties, she found a thin, leather-bound journal with a silver crescent moon on the cover. It was a field journal belonging to Captain Rylan of the Royal Guard. The final entry, dated the day King Kaelin disappeared, was a frantic, half-burned page. It spoke of an ambush, of betrayal from within their own ranks, and of a spell, the Ashen Bond, a curse of stolen form, requiring a vessel of royal blood and an anchor of star silver. It does not kill, it unmakes. Only a constant, opposing force of selfless will can slow its progress. The anchor point is the heart of the Citadel, the old throne. The throne, Cashen's throne, the anchor of the curse wasn't just the manacles, it was a physical object, a focus, and it was sitting in the Great Hall. To break the curse completely, that anchor likely had to be destroyed. But to break the physical bonds, she might have a chance. The journal mentioned Star Silver was vulnerable to 2 things: the blood of the one who forged it, which was lost to time, or a tremendous, concentrated burst of kinetic force applied at the exact moment of a lunar eclipse, when the magical properties of the metal were in flux. The moon's tears eclipse was happening tonight. The kinetic force, the Citadel's ancient clock tower, a massive, pendulous weight used to ring the hours, if she could somehow get that weight to fall. Her mind raced, calculating distances, angles, and the sheer impossibility of it all. But she had a plan, a terrible, dangerous plan that relied on everything going perfectly. Returning to the dungeon just before the guard's midnight sweep, Ilara found the beast in a state of agitated suspense. She showed him the bolt cutters, then pointed up, tracing a path through the air to represent the clock tower. She pantomimed the weight falling. His eyes narrowed, calculating. Then he nodded once. He understood the risk. If the force wasn't enough, or if it was misaligned, it could crush him. Or worse, shatter the stone and bring the entire dungeon down on both of them. But the alternative was to be entombed alive. The choice was made. Ilara's next moves were a tense ballet against time. Using the stolen guard's tunic, she created a diversion at the far end of the upper dungeon, luring the two night guards away with the sound of clanking metal and a muttered curse. She then raced to the clock tower mechanism, a dusty, cobweb chamber of giant gears and the massive iron weight suspended on a thick cable. The release lever was meant for maintenance, rusted shut. She threw her whole weight against it. It didn't budge. Panic began to creep in. Then she remembered a blacksmith's trick. She took a small vial of lamp oil from her apron and doused the lever's joint. She waited, heart pounding, listening for the returning guards. After an eternity of seconds, she tried again. The lever screamed in protest, then gave way with a catastrophic crack. The iron weight plummeted down its stone shaft. Now came the most dangerous part. She had calculated that the weight would swing on its cable, like a pendulum, and if the dungeon's layout in the old blueprints was correct, it would reach its arc directly above the Vault of Echoes. The force of its impact against the castle's foundation stones would be transferred downward. She had to be in the dungeon when it hit. She fled the clock tower as the first shouts of alarm echoed through the stone corridors. Something had broken in the tower. The guards were investigating. She had minutes, maybe less. She slid down the final staircase to the dungeon level just as a deep, resonating boom shook the citadel to its foundations. Dust rained from the ceiling. The sound was followed by a sharp metallic snap, and then a roar, not of pain, but of pure, unadulterated release. Ilara sprinted to the portcullis. The sight that greeted her was one of controlled chaos. The iron bars were now twisted and broken, torn from the stone. The beast was free of his cell, but the manacles were still on his wrists, the chains now snapped and dangling. He was on his hands and knees, breathing in great, heaving gulps of air, his whole body shuddering as if in the grip of a fever. The lunar eclipse was reaching its peak, casting a deep, bloody shadow through the high, barred window. And in that dark light, the transformation began in earnest. It was not a gentle, magical fade. It was a violent, agonizing reconstruction. Bones cracked and reknitted with audible pops. Muscle and sinew writhed beneath the skin. The coarse gray fur fell out in clumps, dissolving into smoke. A human spine straightened against the torment. Through it all, the beast-turning man did not scream. He gritted teeth that were slowly shortening from fangs, his amber eyes locked on Ilara, using her presence as his tether to reality. When the final shudder passed, a man crouched on the dungeon floor. He was naked, skin pale as moonlight from a decade without sun, covered in a lattice of old scars and the fresh, red marks where the manacles had bitten. His hair was a wild, matted cascade of silver white, flowing over broad, muscular shoulders. He slowly, painfully lifted his head. The face was haggard, etched with lines of suffering, but undeniably noble, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw now clenched in endurance, and those eyes, now a clear, piercing amber, free of the beast's glow but burning with a ferocious, focused intensity. King Kalen, the lost alpha of Viridian, drew a trembling breath and spoke, his voice raw from disuse but deep and resonant, rolling with the ghost of a royal cadence. You came back. But the moment of triumph was obliterated by the crash of armored boots on the stairs and the flash of torchlight. A dozen of Cashen's elite guards, led by the regent himself, flooded the corridor, weapons drawn. Cashen, a thin man with cold, calculating eyes, took in the scene, the destroyed portcullis, the broken chains, the naked, transformed king, and the scullery maid standing defiantly between them. His face, initially shocked, twisted into a mask of furious understanding. So Cashen sneered, his voice dripping with venom. The little mouse found the lion, and you freed him, how quaint. He leveled a slender, rune-carved dagger at them. It seems I'll have to finish what that curse started. Pity, I'd hoped to just bury you. The guards advanced. Ilara stepped in front of Kalen, who was struggling to rise on unsteady legs. She had no plan left. They were trapped. But Kalen placed a heavy, steadying hand on her shoulder, pulling himself upright. He stood, towering even in his weakened state, and faced the man who had stolen his kingdom. And then he smiled. It was a terrifying expression, devoid of warmth, filled with the promise of a reckoning a decade in the making. Cashen, Kalen said, his voice gaining strength with every word. You forget. This is my house, and you are not the only one who knows its secrets. Before Cashen could react, Kaelin slammed his bare foot down on a specific, worn flagstone. With a rumble, a section of the dungeon wall behind them slid open, revealing a dark, forgotten passage, a royal escape route, known only to the true kings of Viridian. "Run," Kaelin growled to Elara, shoving her toward the passage. As the guards charged, he turned, grabbed the two broken chains still dangling from his wrists, and with a roar that echoed with both man and beast, he swung them in a massive, crushing arc, buying the seconds they needed to vanish into the darkness. The last thing Cassian saw was the Alpha King's fierce, promising glare before the secret door slammed shut, leaving only the echo of his wrath and the chilling realization that his worst nightmare was now loose in the Citadel. The secret passage was not a tunnel to freedom, it was a descent into memory. As they stumbled through the absolute dark, guided only by Kaelin's hand on the wall, Elara realized they were not escaping the Citadel, they were moving deeper into its heart. The air grew colder, cleaner, and carried a faint, ancient hum of power. Kaelin moved with the sure, painful steps of a man following a map etched into his soul. He said nothing, conserving his strength, but his breathing was ragged. A decade in magical chains had not just twisted his body, it had drained his life force, the very essence of an alpha. He was free, but he was a king without a kingdom, a wolf without a pack, operating on sheer, fraying will. Behind them, in the occupied levels, chaos erupted. Cassian's fury was a cold, efficient thing. He didn't order a reckless pursuit into unknown passages. Instead, he sealed every known exit from the Citadel and activated a lockdown protocol. His story was crafted and disseminated within the hour. A dangerous beast, a cursed creature from the wilds, had been discovered in the old dungeons and had escaped during a structural collapse, aided by a deranged servant girl. A substantial bounty was placed on both their heads, dead or alive, with a special emphasis on the girl being taken alive for questioning. Cassian stood before his court, his face a mask of concerned authority. "This abomination threatens our hard-won peace," he declared. "It wears a stolen shape to sow confusion. Trust in your regent, I will protect you." The lie was planted, but Cassian's private actions betrayed his true fear. He retreated to the throne room, to the massive onyx throne that had been the anchor of the curse. He placed his hands on the cold stone, his lips moving in a silent, desperate incantation. The curse was broken, but the anchor remained, and through it, he could still feel a faint, fading echo of Kaelin's presence. He knew the king was alive, and worse, he knew the king was remembering. While Elara and Kaelin emerged from the passage not into sunlight, but into a cavernous, circular chamber deep beneath the throne room itself. It was the heart of the Citadel, the original Moonwell chamber from which the fortress had been built. In the center lay a pool of still, silver water that glowed with a soft inner light, the true, uncorrupted source of the kingdom's magic, hidden and forgotten by all but the rightful ruler. The moment Kaelin crossed the threshold, the silver water flared brightly. He staggered to the pool's edge and plunged his hands into it. The water steamed and hissed where it touched the raw, cursed wounds on his wrists. He threw his head back, a silent scream on his lips, as the magical energy began to knit his physical injuries and replenish his drained strength. But it could not heal the deeper wounds, the psychological scars of 10 years of conscious imprisonment. When he finally pulled his hands out, the wounds were closed into silver scars. He turned to Elara, his amber eyes clear and devastatingly intense. "You asked for no reward," he said, his voice echoing softly in the chamber. "You expected none for 10 years. He took a step toward her, his movements gaining a predatory grace. "You spoke of your mother of the stars. You cried when the head cook broke your favorite bowl. I heard every word. I held onto them. They were the only things that were real." Elara stood frozen, overwhelmed. The scale of his awareness was terrifying. He had been a captive audience to her entire adolescence. He knew her better than any living soul. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you remember that?" "Because you were kind," Kaelin said, as if stating a fundamental law of the universe. "In a place designed for cruelty, your kindness was a weapon. It broke the curse's hold on my mind long before your clock tower broke its chains." He looked around the sacred chamber, then back at her. "Cassian didn't just want my throne, he needed my power. The Ashen Bond was siphoning my alpha essence, my connection to the land and the moon, through that throne. He's been using it to bolster his own weak magic, to control the weather on the borders, to appear stronger than he is. But the siphon works both ways. Now that I'm free and near the heart," he closed his eyes, concentrating, A faint, ghostly image shimmered above the pool, the throne room. Cashen was there, clutching the arms of the throne, his face strained. A thin, visible stream of silvery energy was now flowing from the throne, asterisk down through the floor, toward them. "He's leaking," Kaelin said with a savage smile. "Every moment I am here, growing stronger, he grows weaker, and he knows it." This was the strategic pivot. They weren't just fugitives. They were a virus in the castle's bloodstream, positioned at its very heart. But their advantage was fragile. Cashen still controlled the guards, the narrative, and the physical gates, and he had one final, brutal card to play. Up in the throne room, Cashen felt the reversal of the energy flow. Panic turned to cold, calculated desperation. He summoned his most trusted and ruthless captain, Vaan. "The girl is the key," Cashen hissed. "The beast, Kaelin, is bonded to her. The curse may be broken, but that bond is a vulnerability. Find her family, her village, use it." Elara believed she had no family, but Cashen's spies had dug deeper than she ever knew. Her parents had not died from a simple fever. They had been part of a small, secretive community of weavers, individuals with a faint, dormant affinity for natural magic, who lived off the land. They were killed because they refused to reveal the location of a sacred grove to Cashen's loggers. Ilara's adoption into servitude was not an act of mercy, but a taking of collateral. And her extended family, her mother's sister and her children, still lived in hiding in the eastern woods. Vaan and a squad of elite guards rode out at dawn. Back in the heart chamber, Kaelin was recovering his strength, but also his memories. In flashes of pain and clarity, he recounted the ambush a decade ago. It wasn't a border skirmish. It was a trap set by Cashen, who had conspired with a banished, power-hungry mage. The curse required a vessel of royal blood, Kaelin, and an anchor of star silver, the throne which Cashen had secretly commissioned. "He didn't just want to kill me," Kaelin growled, packing like the beast he recently was. "Killing me would have made me a martyr. The pack bonds would have passed to my cousin Lysander in the east. This made me disappear. It made the throne empty, but it kept the kingdom's magical tether unstable, weak enough for him to grasp." He stopped, looking at Elara with a haunted expression. "For years, I was aware only of pain and rage. Then you came. The first time you spoke, it was like hearing a language I thought I'd forgotten." This was the core of their dynamic, not in star love, but the slow, profound recognition of two souls who had kept each other sane in their respective hells. Their refuge, however, was about to be violated. Cashen, using the Fadding link through the throne, launched a scrying spell. He couldn't see them clearly in the protected heart chamber, but he could sense their general location deep below. He couldn't send guards through the maze of forgotten passages, but he could do something else. He ordered the castle engineers to begin pumping the ancient drainage cisterns into the lower chambers. He would flood them out. The first warning was the sound of distant, rushing water. A trickle, then a stream, began to pour from a grate in the chamber wall. The silver pool of the moonwell began to churn, its pure light dimming as the foul, muddy water mixed with it. "He's poisoning the heart," Kaelin snarled. They had to move. But where? Going up meant guards. Staying meant drowning. It was Elara who saw the solution. Carved around the rim of the moonwell pool were ancient symbols. She had seen similar ones in the marginalia of the old household ledgers she used to tidy, symbols for the citadel's original water and ventilation systems. "This isn't just a well," she said, her voice quick with excitement. "It's a node, a center." The old blueprints showed conduits, channels that carry the moon water's energy to the sacred sites in the kingdom. She pointed to a particular symbol, a crescent moon over a flowing stream. "This one leads to the grove of the White Willow. It's a day's ride from here. It's outside the walls." It was a desperate gamble. They would have to submerge themselves in the magical water and let the current take them through a stone conduit that might have collapsed centuries ago, but it was their only chance. As the filthy water rose to their knees, Kaelin took Ilara's hand. "Trust the water," he said, "and trust me." They took a deep breath and plunged into the glowing, churning center of the moonwell. The world became a roaring, silver tunnel. The current grabbed them with incredible force, pulling them through a narrow, smooth channel in the bedrock. It was a journey of pure terror and breathtaking beauty, hurtling through liquid light. They were spat out, gasping and disoriented, into a calm, moonlit pool in the center of a hidden grove, the very grove Cashen had sought. The White Willow stood sentinel, its branches shimmering. They were free of the citadel, but as they crawled onto the mossy bank, their relief was shattered by the sound of horses and the harsh glow of torches through the trees. Captain Vaughn stood at the edge of the grove, a knife held to the throat of a middle-aged woman who shared Ilara's eyes. Beside her, two terrified children were held by guards. "Your Majesty," Vaughn called out, his voice dripping with mockery, "the Regent invites you to negotiate, or we start with the little one." He pressed the blade tighter. Ilara's aunt cried out. Kalen surged to his feet, a growl building in his chest, but Ilara grabbed his arm. This was the wait, it gets worse moment. Escape was not victory. Cashin had anticipated their every move, turning their hope into a snare. He wasn't just a usurper in a castle. He held the very concept of family hostage. Kalen, the Alpha King, was faced with an impossible choice: surrender and be cursed again, or watch the woman who saved him have her remaining family slaughtered before her eyes. The true battle for the kingdom was no longer about thrones or dungeons. It was about how far a good man, recently a beast, would go to protect a single, kind heart from breaking. And in that grove, under the cold moon, King Kalen made his decision. Kalen did not surrender, he did not attack. He did something Captain Vaughn and Regent Cashin could never have anticipated. He knelt. In the damp moss of the sacred grove, the Alpha King of Viridian, freshly freed from a decade of torment, went down on one knee. He placed a hand over his heart and bowed his head, not in submission to the blade, but in deference to the women held captive. The gesture was so profoundly unexpected, so antithetical to everything Vaughn understood about power, which was force, threat, and domination, that the captain froze, his grip on the knife loosening for a fatal half-second. "The blood you threaten is under my protection," Kalen said, his voice not a roar, but a clear, resonant decree that seemed to be absorbed by the very trees. "By the laws of this land, older than any throne, the Grove of the White Willow is a sanctuary. Violence committed here against the innocent curses the hand that holds the steel. Do you feel it, Captain, the cold creeping up your arm?" Vaughn blinked. He did feel a strange numbness. It was likely panic and the night chill, but the power of suggestion, wielded by a king in a sacred place, was a potent weapon. Kalen was playing a different game. He was using the psychological authority of his station and the mysticism of the location, assets that remained his even without an army. He slowly rose, his eyes never leaving Vaughn's. "Cashin sent you to break my will by breaking hers," Kalen continued, nodding toward Ilara, who stood rigid with fear. "He understands nothing. Her will was forged in the dark, feeding a beast when she had nothing for herself. You cannot break what has already been tempered. You can only reveal its strength." He took a single step forward. "Release them, leave this place, and you will be granted exile, not execution. This is the only mercy my queen's compassion demands I offer." The word queen hung in the air. It was a declaration, a promise, and a stunning strategic feint all at once. It shifted the entire power dynamic in the clearing. Ilara was no longer a pawn servant. She was a moral authority, a reason for mercy. Vaughn, a man loyal only to the winning side, began to calculate. The king was free, standing in a sacred grove that seemed to hum in his presence, offering a clean exit. The regent was in a panic, leaking magic from a stolen throne. The balance of power was tilting before his eyes. With a muttered curse, Vaughn lowered the knife and shoved Ilara's aunt forward. "The regent will have my head for this," he spat. "No," Kalen said, "he will be too busy fighting for his own." As the guards mounted up and rode away into the night, the immediate crisis was over, but the war was just beginning. Ilara rushed to her family, the reunion a storm of tears and whispered explanations. Kalen gave them a moment, his gaze scanning the tree line. The grove had protected them, but it was not a fortress. Cashin would send more men, and next time they wouldn't hesitate. The solution came from an unexpected quarter. Ilara's aunt, Anya, once the village elder's daughter, spoke through her tears. "The weavers, the few of us left, we have been waiting. We felt the land sicken. We felt the moonwell grow dim. And tonight we felt it pulse again when you emerged from the water." She looked at Kalen with ancient, knowing eyes. "The curse was anchored in the throne, yes, but its roots are in a perversion of the pact between the king and the land. To break it fully, the anchor must be destroyed not by violence, but by sovereignty. You must reclaim your throne willingly and then relinquish its corrupted form." Kalen understood. The onyx throne was a scar on the kingdom's magic. Sitting on it again, even in victory, would perpetuate the wound. He had to take it back only to destroy it. This meant a direct, final assault on the citadel, not as a stealthy fugitive, but as a king returning to claim his hall. They needed an army, and the army arrived at dawn, not with banners and trumpets, but silently from the forests and hidden valleys. Word had spread. The eastern cousin, Lysander, whom Cashen had feared would claim the pack bonds, had indeed felt Kaelin's return. He arrived with 50 of his best pack warriors, their loyalty to the true bloodline unwavering. Joined by the remaining weavers and a contingent of villagers armed with hunting bows and a decade of rage against Cashen's tariffs, they formed a ragged but determined force. Their most powerful weapon, however, was truth. As they marched toward the citadel, Kaelin and Elara did not hide. They walked at the front. The sight was staggering: the lost king, alive but marked by suffering, and the scullery made from the castle's own kitchens, walking beside him as an equal. The story of the girl who fed the Beast King spread ahead of them like wildfire, a narrative more compelling than any of Cashen's lies. When they reached the main gates, Cashen's forces were arrayed on the walls, but they did not fire. The guards saw their king. They saw the silver in his hair, the scars, the unmistakable amber eyes from the old portraits, and they saw the way the rising sun seemed to halo him. Cashen screamed orders from the battlements, but his voice was thin, desperate. The magical siphon had been draining him all night. He looked gaunt, his eyes sunken. The loyalty of men bought with fear is a fragile thing. As Kaelin stepped forward alone and simply said, "Open the gates," the captain of the guard, an old soldier who had served Kaelin's father, gave the order. The gates groaned open. Cashen's reign ended not with a siege, but with a sigh. The final confrontation took place in the throne room. Cashen stood before the onyx throne, a dagger in his hand, not to fight, but as a final, pathetic threat. "It's mine," he hissed. "I shaped it. I took the power you were too weak to hold." Kaelin walked toward him, Elara at his side. "You took nothing," Kaelin said, his voice echoing in the vast hall. "You only twisted what was already there, and in doing so you made it useless." He stopped before the throne. He did not look at Cashen. He looked at the cold, dark stone. He placed his hand upon it. A shudder went through the room. The silvery scar on his wrist, left by the manacle, began to glow. "This throne is a cage," Kaelin announced, his voice rising, carrying to the packed hall of guards, soldiers, and gathered servants who had flooded in. "It was built to hold a beast. It will not hold a king." He closed his eyes. Instead of drawing power from it, he pushed. He pushed a decade of remembered kindness, of Elara's voice in the dark, of the Moonwater's purity, of his people's hope. He pushed the opposite of the curse's intent, not taking, but giving. The onyx throne cracked. A web of fine lines spread across its surface, and from within, a blinding white light erupted. With a sound like a shattered bell, the throne exploded into a million fragments of harmless, grey dust. Cashen screamed, a raw terminal sound, as the last of his stolen magic was ripped away. He collapsed, not dead, but utterly empty, a shell of the man he pretended to be. Justice was served not by an executioner's axe, but by the total annihilation of the source of his power. Kaelin turned to the crowd. "The chair is gone, the crown remains," he gestured to Elara, "and a kingdom is not a seat of stone, it is a covenant. Today that covenant is renewed." The aftermath was a whirlwind of restoration. Kaelin's first act was not a coronation, but a decree. The lands stolen by Cashen were returned, the oppressive tariffs were abolished, the moon councils were reinstated, and Elara was not hidden away or made a silent queen. Kaelin presented her to the court as his equal, his heart, and the reason the kingdom still had a heart to beat. He offered her a choice, publicly: a life of peace and wealth anywhere she desired, or a place by his side, rebuilding a broken world. Elara, who had found her family and her courage in the crucible of the dungeon, looked at the man who had remembered her every word, and at the people now looking to her with hope, not contempt. She chose to stay. The final, surprising detail emerged a moon cycle later. The curse of the Ashen Bond was broken, but its magic had left a residue, a kind of psychic echo. Kaelin discovered that during the full moon, he could still partially shift, not into the mindless beast of the curse, but into a powerful, controlled hybrid form, a blend of man and wolf, his mind fully intact. The curse had tried to make him a monster. Instead, it had unlocked a deeper, more primal layer of his alpha power that had been forgotten for generations. It was a permanent reminder of what he had endured, but also a weapon forged in that darkness, now under his complete control. Similarly, Elara found that her decade of proximity to the Cursed King and the Moonwell had awakened her own dormant weaver magic. She could encourage crops to grow, could sense the health of the land. The victim and the caretaker had both been permanently altered, not defined by their trauma, but empowered by their survival of it. Their reign began not with a grand festival, but with quiet, relentless work. Kaelin ruled with the fierce protectiveness of one who had lost everything, and with the deep patience of a creature who understood time in chains. Ilara governed with the pragmatic compassion of someone who had managed scarce resources her whole life, ensuring no one in the kingdom ever felt as forgotten as she had. The bond between them was the kingdom's new anchor, not of domination, but of mutual resilience. In the courtyard where a clock tower once marked desperate hours, a white willow sapling from the sacred grove was planted. It grew with astonishing speed, a living symbol of a curse transformed into a blessing. The beast in the dungeon was gone. In his place stood a king, a queen, and a story that would be told for centuries, a tale not of a beauty taming a beast, but of a kindness so steadfast it convinced a king, lost in his own monstrous skin, that he was still worth saving. So what is the real magic in a story like this? It's not the curse, or the transformation, or even the crown. It's the quiet, unbreakable physics of a simple choice, repeated over 3,000 nights. Ilara didn't set out to save a king. She set out to offer a piece of bread to a creature in pain. And in doing so, she proved the most subversive idea at the heart of the beauty and the beast archetype, that love is not something that happens to you when you are perfect. It is something you practice, often in the dark, when you have nothing, and it is that practice that makes you worthy of everything. Kaelin's story is not one of a prince being saved by a woman's love. It's the story of a man's identity being preserved by a stranger's consistent humanity. The psychological research is clear. The bonds that save us are not formed in grand gestures, but in small, repeated acts of seeing and being seen. The beast was not tamed. The king was remembered. And in that remembering, he found a strength more formidable than any curse, the will to protect the one who remembered him. This narrative engine, the hidden caretaker, the secret identity, the transformative power of steadfast kindness, taps into a deep universal wiring. We all fear being monstrous, being forgotten, being lost in our own private dungeons. And we all hope that someone might come, not with a sword, but with a bowl of soup, and see the person beneath the pain. The real curse in our world is never the beast. It's the lie that tells us we are undeserving of care. The real magic is the one who quietly, stubbornly, refuses to believe that lie. Ilara and Kaelin's reign became legendary not for its battles, but for its restoration. They proved that a kingdom built on a foundation of hidden cruelty could be rebuilt on a covenant of visible compassion. The throne was gone, but the crown remained, a symbol that true authority doesn't come from a chair of stone, but from the trust of those you serve and protect. If this journey from the deepest dungeon to the highest truth resonated with you, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button. It tells the algorithm that more stories like this matter. Share this with someone who needs a reminder that small kindnesses have world-shifting power. And subscribe to the channel and ring that notification bell. We delve into the hidden architectures of the stories that shape us, unpacking the psychology, history, and real human truth behind the tales you love. Let me know in the comments below, what's one small, consistent act of kindness that changed your life? I read every single one. Until next time, remember, the most powerful kingdoms are not made of stone and silver. They are built, piece by piece, in the dark, by those brave enough to offer bread instead of a blade.